The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across the marble floor of Le Bernardin Royal as Marcus Aldrich raised his voice, his words cutting through the refined atmosphere like a blade through silk. I specifically said no ice in my water, and yet here you are, bringing me a glass that's practically frozen solid. Sofia Reyes stood perfectly still beside table 12, her posture straight despite the weight of humiliation pressing down on her shoulders. The other diners had begun to turn their heads, their conversations quieting as they witnessed the spectacle unfolding in the restaurant's most prestigious section. I apologize, sir, Sophia said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor building in her chest. I'll bring you a fresh glass immediately. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his designer suit perfectly tailored, his blonde hair styled with expensive precision. At 28, he possessed aristocratic features that had graced magazine covers since university, but his blue eyes held something cold that no photographer had captured. This is exactly the problem with people like you, Marcus said, his voice carrying to neighboring tables where European high society sat frozen in fascination. No attention to detail, no understanding that some of us actually have standards. Perhaps you might consider whether you're truly suited for a position requiring such sophisticated service. Surely there are establishments more appropriate to your background. The words hit Sophia like physical blows, each syllable chosen to maximize damage while maintaining civilized discourse. She thought of her small apartment, of bills stacked on her kitchen table, of the photograph beside her mirror showing a younger version of herself beside a man in formal palace livery whose eyes held the same quiet dignity she now fought to preserve. Marcus stood slowly, ensuring every eye in the dining room fixed on his performance. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea of the influence my family wields? One word from me could ensure you never work in a respectable establishment again. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass. I'm sure that won't be necessary, sir. The dining room had fallen silent, staff gathering at the edges while Marcus fed on the discomfort of witnesses too polite or intimidated to intervene. I think this entire establishment has forgotten what it means to serve people of quality. You've become complacent, hiring staff who don't understand the difference between serving a meal and creating an experience worthy of our patronage. It was then that Marcus made the gesture that would transform the evening. Reaching for his wine glass with theatrical flourish, he misjudged the distance and sent both wine and water cascading across the white tablecloth and onto his immaculate suit. Deep red wine spread across his chest like spilled blood, soaking into fabric that cost more than Sophia earned in 3 months. Marcus stared down in shocked silence, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and finally pure rage. You did this deliberately, he snarled, looking around for witnesses to validate his interpretation. You clumsy, incompetent. Sophia moved forward instinctively, pulling a clean napkin from a nearby table. Sir, please let me help. Don't touch me, Marcus snapped, but even as he spoke, he realized his mistake. The wine was setting with each passing second, and his anger accomplished nothing except making him appear foolish. Sophia ignored his protest and began working on the stain with quick, efficient movements, her hands steady despite the chaos. She'd learned technique from watching her father care for formal uniforms, understanding that some stains required immediate attention regardless of pride or protocol. The key is to blot, not rub, she murmured as she worked, her voice gentle, despite everything that had preceded this moment. Rubbing will just push it deeper into the fibers. Marcus stood frozen, caught between his desire to maintain anger and growing realization that Sophia was actually helping him, that her movements were skilled and purposeful in a way that spoke to genuine knowledge rather than mere service training. There, Sophia said quietly, stepping back. It's not perfect, but it should hold until you can get it to a proper cleaner. The sooner the better, though. Marcus looked down at his suit, amazed to see the stain reduced to barely visible traces, that Sophia had somehow salvaged his dignity along with his clothing. For a moment, something almost like gratitude flickered across his features before being suppressed by habitual arrogance. Well, he said stiffly, I suppose that's adequate. Sofia nodded once, a gesture that somehow contained both acceptance of his grudging acknowledgement and forgiveness for everything that had preceded it. Is there anything else I can bring you this evening, sir? Marcus settled back into his chair, acutely aware that every person in the dining room had witnessed not only his loss of control, but Sofia's remarkable composure. The power dynamic that had seemed so clear now felt strangely uncertain. No, he said finally, his voice lacking its earlier authority. Nothing else. Sofia turned to leave, but before she could take more than a step, the restaurant's main entrance erupted in activity that would transform not only the remainder of the evening, but Marcus's understanding of the world around him. Prince Alexander Aldrich entered Le Bernardin Royal with the kind of presence that seemed to bend reality around him, his bodyguards moving with practiced efficiency while maintaining the illusion of casual dining. Unlike his younger brother, Alexander carried his royal bearing with ease that spoke to years of genuine service rather than inherited privilege. His dark hair slightly mussed from evening air, his smile warm and genuinely pleased. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized his brother's unmistakable silhouette. Alexander wasn't supposed to be in the city tonight. He was meant to be attending some diplomatic function in Geneva. "Sorry I'm late, darling," Alexander called across the dining room, his voice carrying easily through the hushed space. "The meeting ran longer than expected, but I couldn't miss our celebration dinner." Marcus watched in growing confusion as his brother moved purposefully through the restaurant, clearly seeking someone specific. Other diners had begun recognizing the prince, their conversations stopping as they witnessed genuine royalty moving through their midst. "Alexander," Marcus called out, rising with a forced smile. "What a surprise! I didn't know you were back in—" But Alexander walked past Marcus's table without acknowledgement, his attention focused entirely on something beyond his brother's field of vision. Marcus turned to follow his gaze and felt the world tilt as he watched Prince Alexander approach Sofia Reyes with gentle intimacy reserved for truly private moments. "There's my beautiful fiancée," Alexander said softly, reaching Sofia just as she emerged from behind the service station. "I hope you weren't working too hard while I was away." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, each syllable rewriting his understanding of the last hour. Fiancée. The waitress he'd been tormenting was engaged to marry the crown prince. Sofia's face transformed as Alexander approached, the careful professional mask melting away to reveal radiance that seemed to illuminate the entire dining room. "Alex," she breathed, stepping into his embrace with natural grace that spoke to deep and abiding love. "You made it." "I promised I would," Alexander replied tenderly. "Nothing could keep me from celebrating our engagement announcement with the woman I love." Marcus sank back into his chair, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality. Around the dining room, other patrons whispered among themselves, the implications rippling through the space like shockwaves. The waitress who had just cleaned wine from Marcus's suit was not only engaged to royalty, she was about to become a princess herself. "How was your evening?" Alexander asked, his arm wrapped protectively around Sofia's waist. "I hope the customers treated you well on your last night of work." Sofia's eyes flickered toward Marcus's table for just a moment, and in that brief glance he saw not triumph or vindication, but something far more devastating. Pity. She pitied him, this woman he had tried to humiliate, this future princess who had just demonstrated more grace in a single evening than Marcus had managed in his entire privileged life. "It was educational," Sofia replied carefully, her diplomatic response revealing the kind of thoughtful discretion that would serve her well in royal circles. "I learned quite a lot about different kinds of people tonight." Alexander followed her gaze toward Marcus's table, his expression shifting as he recognized his brother sitting alone with wine stains on his jacket and the unmistakable look of a man whose world had just been fundamentally altered. "Marcus?" Alexander's voice carried surprise and something that might have been disappointment. "I didn't see you there." "What brings you to Le Bernardin Royal tonight?" Marcus opened his mouth but found himself without words. How could he explain that he'd spent the evening systematically humiliating the woman his brother loved? "I was just dining," Marcus managed finally. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene more carefully. The wine stains, the tension radiating from Sofia despite her composed exterior, the electric atmosphere of a dining room full of people who had clearly witnessed something significant. "Sofia," Alexander said quietly, his voice taking on a tone Marcus recognized from childhood, the careful control their father had used when approaching delicate situations. "Did something happen here tonight?" Sofia looked between the two brothers, weighing her response. "Your brother had some concerns about the service this evening," she said finally, her voice neutral. "We worked together to resolve them." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on Alexander, whose diplomatic training had taught him to read between the lines. His gaze shifted between Sofia and Marcus, taking in details that painted a clearer picture. "I see," Alexander said slowly, his voice carrying subtle warning. "And were those concerns appropriately addressed?" Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead as he realized his brother was giving him an opportunity to explain himself, to somehow salvage the situation before it deteriorated further. "Sofia was very professional," Marcus said carefully, each word feeling like a confession. "She handled the situation with remarkable grace." It was perhaps the first entirely honest thing Marcus had said all evening, and the admission seemed to surprise even him. Sofia's expression softened slightly, recognizing the difficulty of his position. "Well then," Alexander said, his tone lightening as he accepted his brother's implicit acknowledgement, "I suppose introductions are in order. Marcus, I'd like you to meet Sofia Reyes, my fiancée and soon-to-be Princess of Oldenburg. Sofia, this is my younger brother Marcus." The formal introduction hung in the air like a bridge between the evening's cruelty and whatever relationship might be possible in the future. Marcus rose slowly from his chair, understanding that this moment would define not only his relationship with Sofia but his place within his own family. "It's an honor to meet you," Marcus said, extending his hand with far more respect than he'd shown during their entire previous interaction. "I hope you'll forgive my earlier behavior." "I had no idea who you were." Sofia looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before accepting it. "The question isn't who I am," she said quietly. "The question is who you choose to be when you think no one important is watching." The observation hit Marcus with devastating accuracy, exposing the fundamental flaw in his character with surgical precision. He had revealed his true nature when he believed there would be no consequences. Alexander watched the exchange with growing understanding, his protective instincts warring with diplomatic training. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should continue this conversation in a more private setting." But before anyone could respond, Sofia spoke again, her voice carrying a new quality that made both brothers look at her more sharply. "Actually," she said, her dark eyes fixing on Marcus with intensity that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "There's something else you should know, something that might help explain why this evening feels like destiny." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, some instinctive recognition that Sofia's next words would complete a circle he hadn't even known existed. Sofia's hand moved almost unconsciously to the small locket at her throat, a gesture so subtle that only someone watching closely would have noticed it. Alexander's eyes followed the movement, understanding that his fiancée was about to reveal something significant. "My father," Sofia began, her voice steady but carrying undertones of carefully controlled emotion, "was Diego Reyes. He served as head of household staff at the royal palace for 15 years before his dismissal." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the name hit him. Diego Reyes. The memory came rushing back. A summer afternoon when he was 12, angry about some perceived slight, desperate to prove his importance in a household where his older brother already seemed to shine brighter. "He was dismissed," Sofia continued, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face, "because of allegations that he had been stealing from the royal family. Accusations that came from a 12-year-old boy who claimed to have seen him taking silver from the formal dining room. The dining room around them had faded into irrelevance as the weight of Sofia's revelation settled over the three of them. Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to horrified understanding. "The accusations were false," Sofia said, her voice growing stronger. "My father had been polishing that silver, returning it to its proper place after weekly maintenance. But by the time the truth came to light, he had already been dismissed without references, blacklisted from service in any respectable household." Marcus's legs felt weak as the full scope of his childhood action crashed down on him. He remembered that afternoon with painful clarity, his anger at being overlooked, his desperate desire to feel important, the way adults had hung on his every word when he'd claimed to witness theft. "I came to work here," Sofia said, "because I knew that sooner or later our paths would cross again. I needed to see if the boy who lied had grown into a man who could tell the truth." Alexander's hand found Sofia's, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Sofia," he said gently, "why didn't you tell me about the connection when we met?" "Because I fell in love with you, not with the idea of revenge," Sofia replied, her voice growing tender. "Because you judged me by who I am, not by who my father was. Because you saw worth in a waitress that your brother couldn't see in a future princess." The observation hit Marcus like a physical blow, making him understand how completely he had failed every test of character the evening had presented. "But tonight," Sofia continued, turning back to Marcus, "watching you in action, seeing how you treat people when you think there will be no consequences, I realized that some circles need to be completed, some truths need to be spoken." Marcus finally found his voice. "I remember that day. I remember making that accusation. I was angry about something, I don't even remember what, and I wanted attention, wanted to feel important." "You destroyed my father's life," Sofia said simply, the words carrying no anger, just devastating fact. "My father spent the next 3 years working whatever jobs he could find. His health began to fail from the stress. He died when I was 17, still carrying the shame of accusations he had never deserved." Alexander watched his brother with disappointment and something that might have been pity. "Marcus, do you understand what you've done? Not just tonight, but all of it?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I destroyed your father," he said to Sofia, his voice breaking. "And I had no idea. All these years I never thought about what happened to him after he left." "Children make mistakes," Sofia replied, her voice growing gentler. "The tragedy isn't what you did when you were 12. The tragedy is who you became, because no one ever taught you that your actions have consequences, that other people's lives matter as much as your own comfort." "I need to make this right," Marcus said, the words feeling inadequate. "My father is dead," Sofia said quietly, "but there are other people working in service positions, other people whose dignity you have the power to either recognize or destroy." Alexander stepped closer to his brother. "Marcus, I think it's time for you to seriously examine how you treat people." Marcus looked around the dining room, seeing for the first time the staff members who had been watching the drama unfold. Their faces carried no satisfaction at his humiliation, just the weary recognition of people who had witnessed this behavior before. "I want to change," Marcus said, the words feeling foreign. "I want to be better than this." Sofia studied his face for a long moment. "Wanting to change is the first step," she said finally. "But change requires more than desire. It requires daily choices, conscious decisions to see other people as fully human." "Will you help me?" Marcus asked, surprising even himself. "Will you help me learn how to be better?" Sofia exchanged a look with Alexander, some silent communication passing between them. When she turned back to Marcus, her expression had shifted, carrying warmth that hadn't been there before. "Come work with me at the community center where I volunteer on weekends," she said. "Serve meals to people who have nothing, and maybe you'll start to understand what real dignity looks like." Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes, overwhelmed by the generosity of her offer. After everything he had done, she was offering him a path toward redemption. "I would be honored," he said, and for the first time all evening, the words carried complete sincerity. Alexander smiled, recognizing the possibility of genuine change in his brother. "Sophia," he said, "I think you're going to make an extraordinary princess." "I already am extraordinary," Sophia replied with a small smile. "The title just makes it official." As the three of them stood together in the elegant dining room, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The weight of his guilt remained, but alongside it grew something new, the fragile hope that he might someday become worthy of Sophia's forgiveness, worthy of his brother's respect, worthy of the second chance he had been offered. The circle had indeed been completed, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of revenge, Sophia had chosen grace. Instead of punishment, she had offered redemption. And in that choice, Marcus glimpsed the possibility of becoming the kind of man who understood that true nobility comes not from birth or wealth, but from how we treat others when we think no one important is watching. Real worth is how we treat others, and dignity outlives ridicule every single time.